The day started like any other for the young courier. He woke up early, stretched his tired limbs, and grabbed a quick breakfast before heading out for work. His job as a courier was demanding, and he often worked long hours, running from one side of the city to the other. His shoes had worn thin from all the walking, and his clothes were simple and plain. Despite his tough circumstances, he always kept his head up and his heart full of hope. He believed that hard work would eventually lead to something better, even if it didn't seem that way right now. Today, he had a particularly important delivery to make. It was a heavy package wrapped in brown paper, containing something valuable. The address was in a rough part of the city, a place he usually avoided if he could help it. But the courier was used to this. He wasn't afraid of the tough neighborhoods. In fact, he'd walked through them so many times that he had grown accustomed to their rough edges. As he walked down the street, he kept his head down and focused on his work, hoping to finish quickly and avoid any trouble. But then he heard a scream. It wasn't the kind of scream he could ignore. It was desperate, filled with fear. The courier's heart raced as he instinctively turned toward the source of the sound. He spotted a woman surrounded by a group of men. The men looked like trouble, rough and aggressive, blocking the woman's path. She was trying to push past them, but they weren't letting her go. The woman was beautiful. Her long, flowing hair framed her delicate face, and her clothes were elegant, a stark contrast to the rough surroundings. She was clearly out of place here, and it was obvious she was scared. The courier didn't think twice. He dropped the package on the ground and rushed over to the scene, his instincts kicking in. "Hey," he shouted, his voice firm and commanding. "Leave her alone." The men turned toward him, their faces hard and uninterested. They didn't take kindly to anyone interfering in their business. One of them sneered, "What's the kid gonna do? This doesn't concern you." The courier's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't back down. "It does now." Without waiting for a response, he moved quickly, standing between the woman and the men. His hands were clenched into fists, but he wasn't looking for a fight. He just wanted to make sure she got away. The men exchanged glances, sizing him up. They were much bigger and stronger, but there was something in the courier's eyes, a determination that made them hesitate. After a tense moment, one of the men grumbled, "Whatever, kid. This isn't worth the trouble." The others mumbled in agreement, and reluctantly, they stepped back. The woman, breathing a little easier now, stepped forward. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. The courier nodded, still catching his breath. "Are you okay?" She nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Yes, I'll be fine now. Thank you again." She looked at him with appreciation, but there was something else in her eyes, something that told the courier this wasn't just another random act of kindness. This moment felt significant. He had no idea why, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was the beginning of something bigger, something that might change his life forever. As she turned to leave, she paused and handed him a business card. "If you ever need anything," she said softly, "don't hesitate to call." Before he could say another word, she was gone, disappearing into the crowd. The courier stood there for a moment, staring at the card in his hand. His mind was racing. Who was she? Why had she given him her card? What did this all mean? Little did he know, this was the moment that would change everything for him. The courier couldn't stop thinking about the woman. He had seen her for only a few moments, but those moments had left an impression on him that he couldn't shake. It wasn't just her beauty that lingered in his mind, although that certainly played a part. No, it was something more. The way she had looked at him, the way she had been so grateful. It made him feel like he had done something important, even though he hadn't really done anything that special. He had just acted on instinct, protecting someone who needed help. Still, there was something about the way she had handed him that business card that felt different from anything he had ever experienced. It was a simple card, nothing fancy, just her name and a phone number printed on it. And yet it felt like a bridge, like a door to something bigger. He wasn't sure if he should call. What would he even say to her? After all, he was just a poor courier. She was a woman who clearly belonged to a world that seemed so far out of his reach. Days went by, and the courier's life carried on in its usual routine. The work was tiring, the pay barely enough to cover his expenses. But he kept going, as he always did. Every now and then, his mind would drift back to the woman he had helped. Was she doing okay? Was she really safe? He hoped so, but there was a part of him that felt unsettled, like he hadn't finished something. That one moment had stuck with him, and he wasn't sure why. One evening, as he sat in a small, dimly lit apartment after another long day of work, the courier found the business card again. It had been tucked away in his jacket pocket, forgotten for a few days. He stared at it for a moment, unsure of what to do. Part of him wanted to call, but another part was hesitant. What if it was a mistake? What if she thought he was just some desperate man looking for a handout? Still, the curiosity got the best of him. He picked up his phone and dialed the number printed on the card. The phone rang once, then twice. His heart raced as he waited. He could feel the tension building in his chest. He almost hung up, but then a soft voice answered on the other end. "Hello." It was her, the woman. He froze for a moment, unsure of what to say. Then he finally spoke. "Hello, this is the courier, the one who helped you a few days ago." His voice sounded nervous, and he cursed himself for it. He had never been good at talking to people, especially not someone like her. "Oh, I remember you," she replied, a hint of surprise in her voice. "I'm so glad you called." Her words made him feel a little more at ease. He had expected her to brush him off, to tell him she had already forgotten about the incident. But she hadn't. Instead, there was warmth in her voice, a sense of familiarity. He didn't know why, but it felt like a small victory. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay," he said, his voice steadier now. I hope everything's all right after what happened." "Yes," she said. "I'm fine. Actually, I wanted to thank you properly for helping me that day. I owe you." He could hear the sincerity in her voice, and it made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Important. "Well, I didn't do anything that special," he said, trying to brush it off. "I just did what seemed right." "I disagree," she replied. "What you did was very brave. Not everyone would have stepped in like you did. I'm glad you called. I'd like to meet you again." The courier's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't sure if he was ready for whatever this could turn into, but the idea of meeting her again made his heart race with excitement and nerves. "Sure," he said, almost too quickly. "When?" "Tomorrow evening," she said, a smile in her voice. "I'll be in town. I'll send you the details." The courier hung up the phone, his mind spinning. Tomorrow evening. He couldn't believe it. He had no idea what to expect, but one thing was clear. His life was about to change. The next day felt like it was stretching on forever. The courier could barely focus on his work, his mind drifting back to the phone call from the night before. He kept replaying her words over and over in his head. "I'd like to meet you again." Every time he thought about it, his heart skipped a beat. What would this meeting be like? Would it change everything? He wasn't sure what to expect, but the thought of it made him nervous and excited at the same time. As the hours passed, he found himself unable to shake the feeling that his life was about to take a turn. The routine he had known for so long, the long days of delivering packages and scraping by, now seemed like they were fading into the background. But he also knew that he wasn't ready to let go of the life he knew. It was familiar. It was safe. Meeting someone like Isabella, someone from a completely different world, was intimidating. But there was something inside him that told him it was worth taking the risk. When the evening finally arrived, the courier changed into his best clothes, a simple shirt and trousers that, while worn, were as good as he had. He looked at himself in the mirror, unsure if he was ready for whatever might happen. Was he out of his depth? Would she think he wasn't good enough? Shaking off the doubts, he grabbed the address she had sent him and made his way to the meeting place. The street was busy as usual, the city alive with its usual buzz. But tonight, everything felt different. Every step he took seemed to echo louder in his ears, and every car that passed seemed to move faster than it should. He was aware of every detail, his senses heightened in anticipation. The location she had chosen was a small, quiet cafe tucked away from the crowded streets. As he approached, he saw her sitting at a table outside, her back straight and her eyes scanning the street. When she noticed him, she smiled warmly and waved him over. Her presence was calming, yet it held a certain elegance that left him in awe. "Hey," she greeted him, standing up as he approached. Her voice was soft, but there was something comforting about it. "I'm so glad you came." He smiled back, his nerves settling just a little. "Of course, I wouldn't have missed it." They both sat down, and the waiter came by to take their order. Isabella made small talk, asking about his day and how he had been since their first meeting. The courier felt a little awkward at first, but as the conversation flowed, he began to feel more at ease. She was kind, genuinely interested in what he had to say. She didn't treat him like an outsider, and that was something he had always been afraid of. As they talked, the courier learned more about her. Isabella's life was completely different from his own. She came from a wealthy family, had grown up with opportunities he could only dream of, but she didn't boast about it. Instead, she spoke with a humble grace that made him respect her even more. She told him about her work, her travels, and the people she had met along the way. The more she shared, the more he realized how much he wanted to be a part of her world. But there was something else too, something deeper. There was a connection between them that went beyond the surface. It wasn't just about her wealth or his humble background. It was about something intangible, a bond that neither of them had expected but was there all the same. As the evening went on, the courier felt something change inside him. This meeting, this simple dinner, felt like the beginning of something important. It was like a doorway had opened in his life, and he wasn't sure where it would lead, but he knew it was a path he was ready to walk. By the time they finished their meal and stood up to leave, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in a long time. Isabella gave him a smile that made his heart flutter. "I'm really glad we met," she said quietly, looking at him with something close to admiration in her eyes. "Me too," he replied, a genuine smile spreading across his face. As they parted ways, the courier couldn't help but think that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. The days following his meeting with Isabella felt like a whirlwind to the young courier. He couldn't stop thinking about their dinner, the way she listened to him, and how at ease he felt around her. It had been such a simple evening, but for him, it felt like something monumental. The connection between them had been instant, but also easy, as if they had known each other for years. And now, he couldn't help but wonder if there could be more to this. Could this be the start of a friendship, or something more? Over the next few days, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was slowly changing. Every time he went to work, every time he made a delivery, it felt like his usual routine had lost its meaning. The courier couldn't help but compare his simple, hard-working life with the one Isabella seemed to lead. She was part of a world filled with opportunities, beauty, and wealth. It seemed so different from his own. And yet, she had treated him like an equal. Soon after their meeting, he received a message from her. It wasn't just a casual, "I hope you're doing well" note. She invited him to lunch, suggesting they meet at a cafe in a different part of town. The courier hesitated for a moment before agreeing. He wasn't sure if he should be accepting such an invitation. Was it really okay for someone like him to keep spending time with someone like her? But in the end, he couldn't resist. He wanted to know more about her and perhaps learn about a world that seemed so out of his reach. On the day of their lunch, he found himself nervous again. He wasn't used to being around people of such high status, and he worried he wouldn't know how to act. But when he arrived at the cafe, Isabella was already there, smiling warmly at him. She was wearing a simple yet elegant dress that made her look effortlessly graceful. The moment she saw him, she stood up, waving him over with a bright smile. "You made it," she said, her eyes sparkling. The courier smiled back, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. "Of course, I wouldn't miss it," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. As they sat down, Isabella immediately put him at ease, asking about his day and genuinely listening to what he had to say. She didn't rush the conversation, didn't make him feel uncomfortable. They talked about everything from work to life in the city, and the courier found himself laughing and sharing more than he ever expected. It was easy to talk to her, easy to forget about all the worries that had been weighing on his mind. But soon, their conversation took a different turn. Isabella looked at him with a serious expression, her eyes filled with something the courier couldn't quite place. She leaned forward slightly, her voice quieter now. "I've been thinking," she said, "you're not like anyone I've met before. I admire your work ethic, your integrity. You're different from most people in my world, and I think you could be so much more." The courier blinked in surprise. What did she mean? "What do you mean by that?" he asked cautiously. Isabella smiled, but it wasn't the light, playful smile he was used to. It was more thoughtful, as if she was carefully considering her words. "I mean," she said, "you have potential. I've seen it in the way you carry yourself, in how you take pride in your work, no matter how small the task. You deserve better than just being a courier. I think you could do so much more if given the right opportunity." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had always known he was capable of more than his current job, but hearing it from someone like Isabella made him feel seen in a way he hadn't before. His heart raced as the possibility of a better future began to form in his mind. I don't know," he said, unsure. "I'm not sure if I could fit into a world like yours." Isabella's eyes softened, and she reached across the table, her hand resting gently on his. "You don't have to fit into anyone's world," she said kindly. "You just need to believe in yourself. You have something special." For the first time, the courier felt a sense of hope rising inside him. Maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point he had been waiting for. In the days that followed, the courier couldn't stop thinking about the conversation he had with Isabella. Her words had planted a seed of possibility in his mind. And now, that seed was slowly growing into something he couldn't ignore. The idea of a different life, a life filled with opportunities and challenges, seemed almost too good to be true. But the more he thought about it, the more it felt like the right path for him. He couldn't keep living the same way forever, stuck in a cycle of deliveries and scraping by. He needed more, and Isabella had shown him that it was possible. But the courier still had doubts. He had always believed that success was reserved for people with connections, people who had the right education, the right background. He was just a courier, a simple man with little to his name. Could he really succeed in a world so different from his own? The thought of stepping into a business world that was so foreign to him was intimidating, but there was also something inside him that refused to let go of the possibility. Isabella had seen something in him, and part of him felt that maybe, just maybe, he was more capable than he had ever believed. One evening, after a long day of deliveries, the courier sat in his small apartment, staring out of the window at the city lights below. The weight of his decision hung heavily on his mind. Should he take the leap? Should he accept Isabella's offer and pursue something greater than he ever imagined? His heart raced at the thought. He had always played it safe, sticking to what he knew. But now he felt a fire inside him, a desire to try something new. The next day, he made up his mind. He would meet Isabella again and tell her that he was ready. He wasn't sure what would come next, but he knew that if he didn't try, he would always wonder what could have been. This was his chance, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. When they met, Isabella greeted him with her usual warmth. She could tell that something had changed in him, and she smiled knowingly as they sat down together. The courier felt a mix of nerves and excitement, but there was a determination in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began, his voice steady but filled with anticipation. "And I'm ready. I want to take that step. I want to see what's out there." Isabella's face lit up with a smile, her eyes filled with encouragement. "I knew you'd come to this decision. You've got so much potential. I'm really proud of you." For the first time, the courier felt a sense of pride in himself. He had always been unsure of his abilities, but Isabella's belief in him made him feel like he could accomplish anything. Isabella leaned forward, her voice calm but serious. "I want you to take things one step at a time. It won't be easy, but I'll be there to guide you. You don't have to know everything right now. Just trust in yourself and take it day by day." The courier nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't about having all the answers right away. It was about taking that first step and trusting that he could figure it out along the way. Over the next few weeks, the courier began to work closely with Isabella, learning more about the business world and how it worked. At first, everything felt overwhelming. There were so many new things to learn, and he often felt out of place. But with Isabella's guidance, he started to find his footing. He learned about the inner workings of the company, about the strategy behind every decision, and most importantly, he learned how to trust his instincts. As time passed, the courier's confidence grew. He began to take on more responsibilities, and the work became less intimidating. He realized that he wasn't as out of place as he had thought. His experience working hard every day, his dedication, and his ability to persevere were qualities that set him apart in this new world. With each passing day, the courier felt himself changing. He was no longer just a courier. He was someone who was building a future for himself. It wasn't going to be easy, and there would be obstacles along the way. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he was moving forward, and that feeling was worth everything. Isabella had given him the chance he never thought he'd have, and now he was determined to prove that he could make the most of it. The courier's life had been slowly shifting, and with every passing day, the changes felt more real. He was no longer just someone who ran deliveries from one end of the city to the other. Now he was starting to carve a path for himself in a world he never thought he'd be part of. Under Isabella's guidance, he was learning more than he ever imagined about business, strategy, and how people's decisions could shape entire companies. But what he didn't expect was how much it was changing him. The more he learned, the more he realized that he had potential beyond what he ever thought possible. But as he began to gain confidence, a new challenge emerged. The business world wasn't as easy as it seemed, even with Isabella's support. The courier was suddenly thrust into situations that tested his limits: meetings, important decisions, and dealing with people who were far more experienced than he was. It was intimidating, and at times, he felt like an outsider. He didn't have the same background or knowledge as the others. Some of his colleagues even looked at him as if he didn't belong there. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult meeting, the courier found himself feeling discouraged. He had tried to contribute to the discussion, but his suggestions were met with skepticism. He had been trying to prove himself, but the doubt in the room made him question whether he was truly cut out for this. The weight of his insecurity pressed down on him, and for the first time in weeks, he considered walking away. But just as he was about to retreat into his thoughts, he received a message from Isabella. It was short but encouraging. "I believe in you. You've got this." Those few words made him pause. She believed in him. She had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. It was easy to get caught up in the fear of failure, but he couldn't let that control him. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to let his doubts stop him now. The next day, when he walked into the office, he took a deep breath. He wasn't going to let fear hold him back. Instead of shrinking away, he decided to embrace the challenge. He knew he still had a lot to learn, but he was determined to keep pushing forward, even when it felt difficult. Isabella noticed the shift in him immediately. She saw the renewed confidence in his eyes, the way he carried himself with a little more purpose. After the workday was over, she took him aside. "You're doing great," she told him. "I know it feels like a lot right now, but you're handling it well. Just remember, it's okay to make mistakes. What matters is that you keep learning and growing from them." Her words were a balm to his frayed nerves. He realized that he didn't have to be perfect. What mattered was the effort, the willingness to keep trying, and the ability to keep moving forward, no matter how tough things got. He was part of something bigger now, and he couldn't afford to let fear decide his future. Over the next few weeks, the courier kept his head down and worked harder than ever. He took on more responsibilities, asked questions, and paid close attention to the decisions others made. Slowly, he began to find his rhythm. He wasn't making the same mistakes over and over. He was growing more comfortable in his new role and gaining more respect from his colleagues. But it wasn't just about the work. It was also about how he felt about himself. For the first time in his life, the courier realized he wasn't just getting by. He was building something, a future that was uniquely his own. He wasn't just living day by day. He was shaping his destiny, and that gave him a sense of pride he had never known before. Despite the challenges, the courier began to feel a sense of belonging in the world Isabella had introduced him to. He was no longer an outsider, unsure of his place. He was part of a team, part of something bigger than himself. And as he looked ahead, he realized that this was only the beginning. The future was full of possibilities, and he was ready to face whatever came next. Isabella had given him the push he needed, but now it was up to him to keep moving forward. And with each step, he felt more confident in his abilities and more excited for the journey that lay ahead. As time went on, the courier found himself fully immersed in the world he had once thought was out of reach. He had embraced the challenges, learned from his mistakes, and pushed forward with a newfound determination. The road had not been easy, and there had been moments when he doubted himself, but those moments were becoming fewer. He was no longer the nervous young man who had walked into the business world unsure of what he was doing. Now he felt like he was part of the team, contributing in meaningful ways and proving to himself that he belonged. Isabella continued to be his guide, always offering encouragement and wisdom. But now, the courier was beginning to chart his own course. He had learned not only about business, but also about his own strengths. The hard work he had put in was paying off, and he could see the results in the way people responded to him. He was no longer just the quiet newcomer in the background. He had earned the respect of his colleagues. His ideas were being taken seriously, and he was given more responsibility. One day, as he was sitting at his desk, he received an unexpected message. It was from Isabella, asking him to meet her at a cafe in the city. She didn't say why, but he could tell from her tone that it was something important. A mix of excitement and curiosity filled him as he made his way to the meeting. He couldn't help but wonder what this was about. Had she noticed how much he had grown in the past few months? Was she going to offer him something even bigger? When he arrived, Isabella was already there, sitting at a table by the window. She looked up as he walked in and smiled warmly. It was a smile that made him feel at ease, a smile that said everything was going to be all right, no matter what came next. "Hey, how's everything going?" she asked, gesturing for him to sit. "Good," the courier replied. "I feel like things are really coming together. I'm still learning, but I'm getting the hang of it." "I've noticed," Isabella said with a proud smile. "You've been doing great. You've grown so much, and it's clear you're ready for the next step." The courier looked at her, intrigued. "Next step?" Isabella nodded, her expression serious but filled with anticipation. "I want to offer you a bigger role, a more permanent position, one where you'll have a bigger impact on the company. You've earned it, and I believe you're ready for this responsibility." The courier's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment he had been working so hard for. All the long hours, all the self-doubt, all the challenges were leading up to this. He had proven himself, and now he was being offered a chance to take his future into his own hands. "I don't know what to say," he said, his voice filled with awe. "I never imagined this would happen." "You've earned it," Isabella said simply. "You're a hard worker, and you've shown incredible growth. I'm proud of you, and I believe in you." Now, it's up to you to decide what comes next." The courier sat back in his chair, absorbing her words. He had come so far from the person he had been when they first met. He had been uncertain, unsure of his place in the world. But now he felt like he was standing on solid ground, ready to take on whatever the future held. As they talked more about the new role, the courier realized that this was just the beginning. There would be more challenges, more learning, and more opportunities for growth. But for the first time, he was excited about the journey. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving, and he couldn't wait to see where this path would take him. That evening, as he walked back home, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known before. He had stepped into a world he once thought was out of reach, and now he had a place in it. He wasn't just a courier anymore. He was someone who had earned his place, who had proven to himself that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. And as the city lights twinkled around him, he realized that his life had changed forever. What had started with a simple act of kindness had opened doors he never knew existed. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready for whatever came next.